This is the lab interpretation guide for the DestinyWell stress hormone profile. At DestinyWell, we define laboratory ranges in a sophisticated way. We use the standard ranges, represented by the blue bar here, from each reference lab that does a particular test to define the lab high and the lab low. If you have thyroid test results that are too low based on the lab's formal norm, then you have a diagnosis of lab low thyroid function or hypothyroidism. Similarly, for glucose, if you have a lab high blood sugar of over 126 on 2 occasions, then you meet the formal diagnosis criteria for diabetes. That's needed to make a medical diagnosis. But at DestinyWell, we think that there can be a lot more nuance. We believe that there's often an optimal range based on what we have found going forward helps people to live the healthiest lives, to be the healthiest, and to avoid disease. We triangulate this with the medical literature, with other people's standards, with our clinical practice experience, and all the different data points we can get, so we can come up with what we believe is optimal for a particular test result. DestinyWell also, in the red bars here, will define a DestinyWell high and a DestinyWell low. These may or may not line up exactly with a laboratory high or low, because sometimes we think that the range can be higher or lower, or that it needs to be different. And in between the optimal and the green bar, and the low and the high in the red bars, we have orange zones for moderately high and moderately low. They're not quite optimal, but they're not in the high or low zone. The synthesis of steroid hormones is a complex process. They're all very closely interrelated. So I want to show you this complex diagram so you can get some sense of how male hormones like the testosterone and androgens and female hormones like the estrogen hormones are related to the precursor pathways as well as related to the production and the use of cortisol in the body. It all starts with cholesterol. If you don't have enough cholesterol, your cholesterol level gets too low, or you take medicines that drastically lower your cholesterol, then you may actually not have enough precursor to make the steroid hormones you need. Your testosterone levels or your estrogen levels may go down, and that may decrease your well-being. Cholesterol is metabolized first to pregnenolone, and then it goes by a couple different pathways. One over to 17-hydroxypregnenolone, and the other down to progesterone. Progesterone is one of the main female hormones. And then from there, it can go to 17-hydroxyprogesterone. Yet that can also come from the other pathway. Now, a critical thing to know is that if you're under major stress, your body thinks it needs cortisol. It needs cortisol to regulate its salt and water balance and to survive on a minute-to-minute hourly basis. So if you are under an acute stress, if you're in a car accident, you have a heart attack, you're being chased by a lion, your body knows it has to crank that up to deal with the stress, to decrease inflammation, on an emergency basis to raise your blood sugar. If, however, you're not in that emergency situation, but you respond the same way to chronic stress, like your boss in the office, or chronic financial difficulties, or relationship problems, or you're just an ultra worrier and you keep yourself in stress mode all the time, then your cortisol level will stay high. That does two things. One, cortisol itself is good in the short term, but in the long term, it's damaging. It can decrease the hippocampus, the area in your brain associated with incorporation of memory. It can decrease the quality of the bacteria in your gut and the lining of your gut. It can lead to certain side effects like insulin resistance and raising your blood sugar, leading to prediabetes and diabetes. It can raise your blood pressure, and it can suppress your immune system over time. Cortisol is converted to cortisone in inactive form, and that happens more when you have insulin resistance, obesity, fatty liver, things associated with diabetes. But then it can serve as a reservoir, the cortisone, that's converted back into cortisol and keeps the level high. So if your body thinks it's in an emergency situation, you get what's called the cortisol steal. All the precursor hormones that start with cholesterol and come down that pathway are sucked into cortisol so that you can survive on a minute-to-minute basis. Well, what does that do to your other hormones? Well, if it all goes to cortisol, then there's nothing that goes through the pathway of DHEA and androstenedione. Those are the pathways that lead to production of testosterone and male hormones, and they lead to the production of estrogen and female hormones. So DHEA is a very important precursor molecule. It's a mild androgen. It's one of the most common hormones we have in the bloodstream, and it's made by the adrenal glands. Now, people who take DHEA often get improved well-being because there are receptors in the brain that respond to that. It helps muscle mass and helps overall well-being. That's fine on the short-term basis, but if you keep dumping DHEA in, you really have no idea what's going to happen. Some of it may go down into the estrogen pathways, so if you're a man and you're taking it to have more muscle strength, you may end up with more estrogen and estrogenic side effects like enlarged breasts or changes in your emotion. If you're a woman and you're taking DHEA at a dose that's too high, you may end up converting it to testosterone and male-type hormones, or the DHEA itself at higher doses can have masculinizing effects like changes and deepening in your voice, increased acne, hair growth places you don't want, and clitoral enlargement. So all these things are related and they can convert back and forth. If you have significant insulin resistance or you're overweight, then it activates an enzyme called aromatase. And aromatase converts testosterone into E2 or estradiol, which is the strongest estrogen hormone, leading to those female-type side effects. If you're a woman and you have insulin resistance, then the lyase pathways from progesterone to 17-hydroxyprogesterone lead to more androstenedione that can also lead to the increases in testosterone, as is seen in conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome. So you can see all of these are terribly interrelated in a complex way, and different factors from your use of alcohol to your body habitus to whether you take external hormones like DHEA or estrogen or testosterone, they can all affect each other. So taking testosterone, if you don't block the pathways, can lead to increased estradiol or estrogen. And so we need to know the effects of all the things that we're doing, and we need to understand that they're complex and they're interrelated. And the more we understand these, the more we can get to the result that we actually want. The first part of this pathway we're going to break down is the estrogen hormone part of the pathway. Again, things start with cholesterol, and they end up at 3 different estrogens: estrone, estradiol, and estriol. E2, or estradiol, is the strongest of these, the one that's the principal circulating hormone before menopause and is made in the ovaries by women. There's estrone, which is a weaker hormone, and there's estriol, which is also a weaker hormone that comes from estradiol as a less active metabolite. So it starts with cholesterol and goes to pregnenolone and to progesterone. As we said, progesterone is important in both men and women for function of the nervous system. It's helpful for sleep, and it helps with healing of tissues when they're injured. You can go to 17-hydroxypregnenolone or 17-hydroxyprogesterone. Both of those go to the weak androgens DHEA and androstenedione. DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone, is an androgenic molecule. It's one of the most common hormones in circulation. It's made by the adrenal glands, and it's a precursor made into a lot of other things. It peaks in around the 20s, and then as you get older, the levels gradually go down. Now, if you just take exogenous or external DHEA, it will improve your sense of well-being. It'll help muscle mass a little bit. There are receptors in the brain that respond to this. And so a lot of times people say, well, take some DHEA, it'll help you feel better. And it might. But the problem with pouring in a precursor molecule like DHEA is you never know where it's going to go. So you pour in a high dose of this. If you're a man, some of it may get metabolized into the estrogens like estrone and through testosterone to estradiol. And if you're a woman, it may go into the testosterone pathway. So let's say you're a man, you take some DHEA initially, you get a high dose of that in your system, you get more well-being, you may make some more muscle and feel better. But if you metabolize a lot of it into estrogens, you may get some loss of muscle mass, you may get development of breast tissue, you may get changes in emotional situation and how you feel that you weren't expecting. The opposite is true in women, is if you pour in a bunch of DHEA, you probably will get some increased well-being. You might get a little bit of muscle boost, but additionally you can metabolize that into male hormones. And so if you increase your testosterone or some of the other androgens by doing that, you can get acne, you can get deepening of the voice, you can get other changes or even enlargement of the clitoral area. And so there are a lot of different things that can happen by messing with these precursors. So in general, cholesterol through the progesterone pathways go to the intermediates, and then they're converted to the weak estrogen estrone, and then through testosterone to estradiol. That's where most of it happens in the ovaries. It's directly produced as estradiol and released there. After menopause, estradiol comes from aromatization of some of the adrenal precursors, the DHEA and androstenedione, and so there is less of the estradiol and more of the E1 and E2 hormones following menopause. Now let's take a look at the testosterone or androgen side of the pathway. Again, it begins at cholesterol. Cholesterol has the ring structure that can be made into any of the steroid hormones. It always goes through pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is the initial sex steroid-related metabolite, and that can be turned into progesterone, into the estrogen family, or into the testosterone and androgens. So from pregnenolone, it can go to progesterone. Progesterone also has important functions in men in the neurologic tissues and also for healing. Both pregnenolone and progesterone have 17-hydroxy metabolites, so pregnenolone goes to 17-hydroxypregnenolone and progesterone goes to 17-hydroxyprogesterone. Those can be converted respectively into DHEA and into androstenedione. DHEA can go through intermediates into testosterone, and androstenedione can go directly to testosterone. So both of these pathways ultimately lead to testosterone. We've talked about DHEA as well having important roles. Both DHEA and androstenedione have testosterone-like effects, but they're much weaker, although they do circulate in high levels because they're some of the main hormones made by the adrenal gland, especially DHEA. It's a major precursor molecule. When we give DHEA from the outside, we get increased well-being because there are receptors in the brain that it fits into and helps with overall feeling and how you're doing. It also helps with muscle mass. But like we discussed previously, DHEA can go unpredictably into different pathways. It can end up as estrogens in men, and it can end up as testosterone in women. So the main pathway from cholesterol to testosterone is through the progesterone metabolites, through the weak androgens DHEA and androstenedione, to testosterone itself. Cortisol is a key hormone. It's a life and death hormone. When you're stressed, when you're chased by a lion, when things are desperate in your life, then you make more cortisol. You're in a car accident, you have a heart attack, your body needs to mobilize everything for an emergency. That cranks up your cortisol. So cholesterol goes to pregnenolone and progesterone. Both of those lead to intermediate hormones, 17-hydroxypregnenolone and 17-hydroxyprogesterone. From there, they go to deoxycortisol and then to cortisol itself. Every cell in the body needs cortisol. In an emergency, it's great. It raises your blood sugar, it suppresses your immune system so that you use all of your capacity for flight or fight rather than building things. So it breaks down proteins, it breaks down sugar in storage forms, and it mobilizes you for an emergency, which in an emergency is a great thing. But when you don't have an emergency, when you have a situation where your body's interpreting it as an emergency in our modern culture, you don't get along with your boss, your job is stressful, you have financial difficulties, there's relationship issues or stress where you're living, and your body interprets that as an emergency, then you have sustained high levels of cortisol. Those sustained high levels can break down muscle, they can change the lining of the gut and the integrity of the gut membrane so that you have a leaky gut. They change the health and the character of the microbiome. They make areas of your brain like the hippocampus, which is important for short-term memory incorporation, they make those areas shrink. So an emergency on a long-term basis is not a good thing. But when your body perceives it's in trouble, it shunts as much cholesterol and as many precursors as possible into cortisol. Now cortisol has one other thing that can happen to it. It can get turned into the inactive cortisone form. Cortisone serves as a reservoir, and so people who have insulin resistance, they have VAT or visceral adipose tissue, fat around the middle, people with diabetes, folks like that are more likely to have high levels of cortisone. The cortisone serves as a reservoir, and so when cortisol goes down, it gets converted back from cortisone to keep it high. So people in that situation may have sustained higher levels of cortisol. So that's the pathway from cholesterol to your emergency hormone cortisol, which is important at moderate levels for function on a day-to-day basis and is used as an emergency situation hormone for things that come up. Cortisol is the body's main stress hormone. The reference lab range for cortisol is 8.5 micrograms per deciliter to 19.8 micrograms per deciliter. Cortisol has a strong diurnal pattern. It tends to peak in the morning, and if it doesn't get up to normal morning levels, we worry that you're cortisol deficient, or you could even have a disease like Addison's disease, where your body makes inadequate amounts of cortisol. DestinyWell has set the optimal range at 10 to 15, mildly high at 15 to 19.8, and too high over 19.8, with mildly low at 8.6 to 9.9, and too low at less than 8.5. So symptoms of too much cortisol when you get Cushing's disease are red, round, flushed face, elevated blood pressure, thinning of the bones and osteoporosis, elevated blood sugars or diabetes, purple stretch marks or stria on the skin look the same that many women get with pregnancy, mood swings and anxiety, rapid weight gain in the face, chest, abdomen, and with thin arms and legs, and often with a buildup of fat in the upper central shoulders. These people will often have increased thirst and frequent urination. Symptoms of too little cortisol, Addison's disease, include fatigue, dizziness, especially dizziness on standing, a lot of nausea, weight loss, muscle weakness, mood changes, and then darkening of the skin. They may get an actual bronze type color that's even different than you get with an intense suntan. The ranges for DHEAS, dihydroepiandrosterone sulfate, in women are lower than those in men. DHEAS is one of the most commonly produced hormones by the adrenal gland, and hence there are higher levels of this hormone circulating than others. It's a complex molecule and tends to go toward the androgenic or testosterone side, but it also fits into estrogen receptors. More importantly, it serves as a precursor for other steroid hormones. This is important to have enough so that you can make estrogen and testosterone and the hormones you need. But it also is a risk. If DHEA builds up too high in the bloodstream, or if you take DHEA supplements, you can have unwanted hormone consequences by stimulating pathways you weren't looking for. So women who take DHEA over time may build up too many precursors and end up making testosterone-like molecules that have masculizing effects, such as unwanted hair growth, deepening of the voice, enlargement of the clitoris, and worsening cholesterol values. Men who take DHEAS supplements may have similar problems on the opposite side. They may make too much estrogen-type hormones and end up with excess breast tissue, increased emotional changes, and other symptoms or problems. The ranges for laboratory reference for DHEAS in women are 40 micrograms per deciliter on the low side to 290 micrograms per deciliter on the high side. For men, it's 70 micrograms per deciliter on the low side and 325 micrograms per deciliter on the high side. We generally feel that being in the upper half of the range is healthier for. On the previous chart, you could see the cortisol peaks in the morning around 8 a.m., goes down by noon, goes down further in the afternoon, and then it bottoms out late at night into the wee hours of the morning. That's the normal diurnal or day cycle pattern of cortisol. On this chart, you can see the ranges for different times of day. You can see that the highest ranges are in the morning, and then it goes down in parallel with the graph. Tests included in the DestinyWell stress profile include salivary cortisol at 4 times during the day, around 8 in the morning, around noon, mid to late afternoon, and in the evening, as well as DHEAS, dihydroepiandrosterone sulfate, which is a longer-term marker of stress and well-being. This profile is important because stress responses are essential to understand. Getting a handle on your biochemical stress pattern can give you an objective look at how you're doing. This represents enthusiasm to explore living a healthier, more balanced life. At DestinyWell, we've been extremely fortunate to find some amazingly good coaches, people with backgrounds of success in varied fields who bring all sorts of resources and talent and skill to help you. These folks have many years of clinical experience, and they know how to be of assistance at every step of the way, from motivation to connecting you with the right resources to finding things that you need to get you on your journey. To learn more, go to destinywell.com/coaching to meet our team and find out how they can be of service to you.